So first up is Christopher Simmons. He's the principal of the design firm Mine right here in San Francisco. Christopher.
All right, good afternoon. We've been hearing a lot about empathy today, and I was trying to convince Morgan to let me wear his shoes, because I understand there have been some disparaging tweets. For the record, I love his shoes. Feels good to be out here. All right, so if I can get this go forward. One, in 2008, I was walking down a rural road in Alabama with a friend of mine named Brian Collins, who runs an agency in New York City called Collins. Part of the road looks like this due to years of economic neglect and decline. And parts of that same road look like this, thanks to efforts by organizations like the Rural Studio. As we're walking down that road, we were there, both of us, as advisors to this project that John Bielenberg started called Project M, which probably many of you are aware of. That particular year, the effort was arranged around trying to bring municipal water hookups to rural families. About a quarter of the residents in this particular county did not have hookups to clean water and would go to a Texaco station, sometimes even for washing or drinking water. So this was that initiative. A couple of years later, that same group of young designers started this project called PyLab right in that same town. And PyLab is a pie restaurant that occupies what had been a vacant storefront on Main Street. They sell pie, but more importantly, it's a kind of a community center, a place where people from the community can come and speak sort of on a level playing field, meet with the Project M team, meet with each other, community leaders and organizers, et cetera. As I was walking down that road with Brian, we started talking about this idea of problem solving. And I was just astounded that these sort of young designers with no real sort of business training or entrepreneurial background, most of them, could come together in a very short time. These projects typically happen in about a month span, start to finish, from identifying the problem to conceiving it, to executing it. So the thinking and the making, as we were just hearing about. And Brian turned to me and said, it's not the problem solving that's remarkable. It's that it's problem seeking. And I thought that was one of the most profound things that I'd ever heard. I went to school and had practiced for a number of years at that point under this definition of design as problem solving. The idea that you wait for a client to come to you with a problem, with a goal, and your job is then to respond to that creatively and to make it happen somehow. And that was a definition that served me very well. It serves me pretty well today as well. But the idea that we could take more responsibility for our work as designers and to be more proactive in identifying the problem and identifying what it is that we want to work on and then working on it just seemed really empowering. And so that was sort of an epiphany moment for me. Gabi talked about this epiphany that she had 4 or 5 years ago. So, well, I didn't change my business, but it changed the way I thought about myself as a designer and the way I thought about design projects. And so as I've been thinking about it, there's sort of 5 ways, I think, in which designers seek problems. I'm just going to have time to go through maybe 2 of them today, and I'll tell you a couple of quick stories by way of example. One of those ways, I think, is about activism. So there's a designer here in San Francisco named Brian Singer. He used to be a AIGA San Francisco chapter president. He goes by the moniker Some Guy. And on his way to work every morning, he would pass, as we all do, homeless people, and kind of the same homeless people, and particularly the same homeless person. And one day that man was gone. And he realized he'd sort of been taking his presence for granted for some time and decided he wanted to do something about it. And so he just created this little intervention of hand sort of cross-stitching these home street home placards on cardboard and framing them, putting them up in the places where these people lived. And it's a small act. It's an act of empathy. It drove some awareness. It's not a world-changing solution, but it's a neighborhood-changing solution, and that's kind of the same thing. Another example from San Francisco, you probably have noticed, or maybe you haven't, designers tend to notice everything, that the garbage cans here are flat on the top. And so what would happen oftentimes is people would go out to a restaurant at night, they'd get their doggy bag, whatever, and then decide they didn't really want to take it home, and they'd leave it out on top of the garbage can rather than in the garbage, because that way a homeless person could come and get some clean food and sort of skip the humiliation of having to rummage through the bin. And a couple of designers at a group called Language of Commons sort of noticed this behavior. They observed this behavior that was already happening and said, how could we encourage this to happen more? This is a good thing. And so they decided that the best way to do that would be to come up with a name for it. So they called it Replate, and they made a website and sort of open sourced this idea of this sort of logo and stickers for it. And just gave people a way to talk about and share this idea of doing this thing that they're already doing. And it was amazing. Within a week of launching this project, ABC called, NBC called, CBS called. They were written up in Good Magazine, I think, and Fast Company and some other places. The health department called them eventually. But they wanted stickers. There was some controversy around it, and there's some health issues as well. But I think the important thing there is that they didn't wait for permission. They didn't go and seek out an agency that was already working with this issue. They just said, you know what? It's within our grasp. Let's do it. And then this example from the UK, there's a designer in England named Tom Gilbert, who did not paint this painting, by the way. This is Ophelia by John Everett Millais from like 1852. It depicts the Hogs Mill River, which is a river that feeds the Thames. This is, I suppose, what it looked like a couple of hundred years ago. This is what it looks like today. We can get it there. There we are. It's full of urban debris and refuse, and basically pretty disgusting. And this designer wanted to do something about it, and so he had this brilliant idea, I think it's brilliant anyway, to collect the garbage from the river and take it in a little push cart that he built with parts that also came out of the river, various bits of debris, to Portobello Road, which is the largest antiques market in the world, and sell it as Hogs Mill River Antiques. So, is a way for him to raise a little bit of money and put that towards river cleanup. But really, what it was is about creating awareness. There's really no typography involved here. There's no imagery. There's no website. There's nothing. There's no technology in this at all. It's just garbage out of the river, assembled, and then presented again as performance. And so I think if we look at, say, these three projects together, I'm trying to get my little clicker to work here. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. What do they have in common? First of all, none of them really look like graphic design or communications design the way we probably studied it in school or the way we practice it in most of our lives. They all addressed a problem to which the designers were directly connected. They had a personal connection to it. They knew this person. That is their river. They all focused not on the enormity of the problem, but on how small the solution could be. And they were all fearless. They didn't ask for permission. And so I think the idea of keeping it personal, keeping it small, and keeping it fearless is really one of the really empowering ways in which designers can be most effective. So another way that I think that we seek, clicky, clicky, there we go. And this is the one that I think is sort of the most exciting to me, is this idea of sort of creative entrepreneurialism. So I am a big Louie CK fan recently. I just sort of discovered his work and his comedy, and I was reading an article about him, I think in The Atlantic, maybe a week or so ago, and it turns out he writes and produces and shoots and edits his entire show himself. He edits it on his laptop at home. He has total creative control over this thing. And it's a really good show, I think in large part because of that sort of uncompromised nature. He's use sort of technology to do away with the infrastructure that is often an impediment to the kind of projects and the kind of work that we want to do. When Frank Romero wanted to write a book, he didn't go to a publisher. He didn't need Amazon. He went to Kickstarter. He raised $80,000, which is a lot more than most of us get paid to write books, by the way, and built it and funded it and funded the printing and wrote it and designed it himself. And when it came to distribution, well, he's got a great network. He used Twitter. He used this sort of virtual infrastructure to distribute it. And so he took total control of that project. And so designers now are using, I think, the tools that we've typically applied to problem solving to sort of bring our clients' companies and products to market and using it to invest in the ideas that we're passionate about. So that could be axes, or it could be wine. But it can also be transforming the way we think about travel. This is a shot from Airbnb's headquarters. Airbnb is launched by a graphic designer and an industrial designer from RISD. This is the Embrace Warmers. It's an ultra low cost incubator for developing countries. It costs about 1% of what a traditional incubator costs. And this is a project that came out of the Stanford D School. These are designers and engineers applying their passion and their interest in a creative entrepreneurial way. So it can be for sort of traditional commercial means, but it can also obviously be for social change. We heard from Gabi this morning about Sparkwise and the way that the designers are creating, not just these projects, but the tools to empower these projects, sort of whole new infrastructures that give designers the kind of freedom to pursue their own interests. We just saw that amazingly touching video from Ideas That Matter. This is people who are allied to the design trade. Paper manufacturers are now in the business of creating funding sources and support mechanisms for designers to pursue their dreams. And this is Ben Blumenfeld, who took the knowledge that he gained and the networks that he established through working at Facebook for many years, and has started this initiative called the Designer Fund, which is a venture capital incubator and mentor program to encourage designers specifically to be creative entrepreneurs and specifically for social good. And then finally, you have programs like Stanford's D School, as I mentioned, or CCA has a Design MBA program that are bringing the idea of design thinking to all disciplines of engineering and business, or in the case of CCA, bringing the tools and talents necessary from the business side into the design environment. So this sort of blurring of boundaries that is sort of, I guess, empowering designers to be the kind of seekers that we want to be. And so finally, I would say that for me, that moment on the road with Brian kind of crystallized something for me. It crystallized the idea that perhaps the last 50 years, design belonged to the people who were the most creative problem solvers. But the next 50 years, I think, are going to belong to the most attentive and astute and creative problem seekers. And I think those seekers are the people in this room. I think they are the people who come to conferences like this, and I think that moment starts now. And I think they want me to get off stage, so thanks.